Let's get started on Chapter 12, Using Mobile Computers. In this chapter, we will discuss wireless networking, the Windows Mobility Center, and multiple display configuration settings. We will look at presentation settings, power configuration, and offline files. We will look at synchronization at BitLocker and BitLocker to go. We will look at VPN, Virtual Private Network, NAP, Network Access Protection, Remote Desktop Gateway, and Direct Access. Let's do a bit of a review of wireless networking. As you know, in wireless networking, the user's workstation, whether it's a laptop or a desktop computer, has a wireless network interface card which connects to the wireless access point. So let's look at connecting to an unsecure wireless network, assuming, of course, that service set identifier broadcasting is enabled. So if I want to connect to a wireless network, I go down to the taskbar and I click on the networking icon, and this shows the networks which are near me where the wireless access point is broadcasting, and here's a network right here. And if I click on it, then this connects me to that wireless network, and I am now connected to that wireless network. That assumes that broadcasting is on. But let's discuss security risks associated with wireless networks. Let's just say you're in an apartment, and if you have broadcasting turned on, and if you don't have security configured, then two threats that you face are unauthorized access and eavesdropping. Unauthorized access is where your neighbor simply connects to your wireless router through the floor, because radio waves have no problem going through wood, to your wireless router and can use your internet connection. And of course, the worst that's going to do is just slow you down a little bit. But the bigger threat is eavesdropping, whereby any signal that you send to your wireless router could be picked up by the person downstairs if the person downstairs had a protocol analyzer. Those are the two threats. So to protect us against those threats, we implement Wi-Fi security, which includes disabling service set identifier broadcasting on the wireless router, entering a passphrase. People have passwords, and pieces of hardware have passphrases. So we put the same passphrase on the wireless access point and on the user's workstation, and then enabling encryption. And the reason we enable encryption is because in case a bad guy is listening with a protocol analyzer, he can listen, but it's not going to make any sense to him because the signal is encrypted. So first we go to the wireless access point and we disable service set identifier broadcasting. We type in the name of the network, which is also called the service set identifier. We enter a passphrase, which they sometimes call a key, and we also enable encryption. We do that on the wireless access point. Then we go to the workstation and we do the same thing. We enter the service set identifier, the passphrase, obviously the same passphrase that was entered on the wireless access point, and we enable encryption. To connect to the wireless access point in most networks, typically the wireless access point, not always, is going to be 192.168.1.1. So if I go to my browser and I type http:// the IP address of the router, press enter, then that will take me to the router configuration screen. Here I can enable or disable wireless. I can type in the name of the network, which is also called the SSID. I can enable security. WEP stands for the Wired Encryption Protocol. And then I can type in a key code, which they also call a passphrase. So this is the information that I type in to the wireless access point when I configure it. Then I go to the workstation and I enter the same information. This is on page 451, configuring the wireless workstation. I go into Control Panel, into Network and Internet. Under the Network and Sharing Center, we see I have an option for Manage Wireless Networks. I select that option, and then I click on Add to add a wireless network. I click on Add. How do you want to add the network? Manually. I select manually create a network profile. Then I type in the name of the network, and I have to type it in because it's broadcasting is disabled on the wireless access point. I type in the name of the network, which is also called the SSID, Service Set Identifier. Then under security, I enable security, and there are different levels of security, and I usually want to select the one, I always want to select the one which corresponds to what's on the wireless access point. So WEP is an old one for old wireless access point, but the current, latest and greatest encryption type is WPA personal, at least in the WPA2 personal, and that's what we will select in this example. And then I would specify the encryption type, and then I type in the security key, which they also call the passphrase. And of course, that's the same number that I typed in on the wireless access point. Click on Next, click on Close, and there is the new connection I made. And if I right-click on this guy and I look at Properties, I can see that that's the name of the wireless network, that the security type is WPA2 personal, encryption has been selected, there is the network key, and under connection, I select the checkbox that says connect automatically with the network which is in range, and the last checkbox I definitely want to check. Connect even if network is not broadcasting. I mean, that's why we're doing this, because we're disabling service set identifier broadcasting on the wireless access point, so not just anybody can connect. So the only people who can connect are those who know the service set identifier. Definitely click on that checkbox. So if you connect to an unsecure wireless network where a service set identifier broadcasting is enabled and which has no passphrase, then anyone can connect, and that is a not very secure network at all. For wireless security, what we do is on the wireless access point, we disable broadcasting, enter a passphrase or a key, and enter the encryption type. Page 454 discusses the Windows Mobility Center, and gosh, doesn't everybody have a mobile computer these days? And if we go to Control Panel and select Hardware and Sound, we see the Windows Mobility Center. I will select that, and this is the Windows Center. So let's start discussing the components of the Windows Mobility Center. Let's talk about an external display, configuring multiple displays. You can have two monitors hooked up to one single computer, and I would like to discuss the difference between duplicate and extend. If we go into Control Panel, into Hardware and Sound, and then we select Display, and on the left side we select Change Display Settings. In this example, you can see that Windows 7 has detected that two monitors are plugged in because it shows monitor 1 and monitor 2. And under the multiple displays setting, notice the drop down, and you can select either duplicate or you can select extend. So what's the difference? When you select extend, what that does is it takes your screen and stretches it across two monitors, and it makes it like you have one very big monitor. That's extend. Now, the other method is to duplicate. So in this case, you can see a guy has a laptop computer, and it's hooked up to an overhead projector. So in this case, what is on his laptop computer is going to be duplicated as to what's on the overhead projector. It would make no sense to use extend in this example. Page 458 is connecting to a network projector. And there are two ways you can connect. You can browse the network, or you can just type in the IP address if you know what it is. So if we click on Start and go to Accessories and then select Connect to a Network Projector, we see a message comes up that says Windows Firewall is blocking the network projector. Do you want to open that port in the firewall? And we say absolutely. So we select Allow the network projector to communicate with my computer, which opens a port in the firewall. And then we can browse, or we can simply enter the projector network address. So I will select that, and then I will type in the network address, in this case 10.29.1.110. I do not have a password on my projector. I click on Connect, and then it says, what do you want to do? Duplicate or extend. And since it's for an overhead, I would select Duplicate. When you configure monitors to connect to a projector, you typically select Duplicate. Page 460, Presentation Settings. When you do a presentation, you don't want the screensaver to kick in right in the middle of the presentation. So if we go to Hardware and Sound, to the Mobility Center, and we select Presentation Settings, and we click on the checkbox that says I am currently giving a presentation, that what that's going to do is it's going to turn off the screensaver, and you can either turn the volume down or turn it down all the way so no sounds occur in the auditorium. And a lot of people have pictures of their kids as their screen background, and usually you don't want to do that when you're doing a presentation to an auditorium full of people, so that's why you would click on checkbox, and in this example it's just a black background. There is no screen background. So when I'm giving a presentation, I click on that checkbox. Page 463, Monitoring Battery Power. Let's look at power plans and creating a custom power plan. If you go into the control panel and you go into Hardware and Sound and you select Power Options and select a power plan, if we look at the current plan, which is balanced, we can click on Change Plan Settings, and at least the way I have it configured on my laptop computer is that if it's not plugged into the wall and it's operating on battery, I dim the display after 10 minutes and turn off the display after another 10 minutes and puts the computer to sleep after 20 minutes. Why is that? Well, so if I walk away and forget about it, the battery's not going to go totally dead. However, if it is plugged into the wall, then I'm not going to have it dim the display for 2 hours or turn off the display for 2 hours, or in this case, I don't even have it put the computer to sleep for 5 hours. So you've got on battery settings and plugged in settings. Now, if you, that was change advanced power settings, If it does go to sleep and you press any key to bring it back awake, what do you want it to do? We can select the option that says require a password on wake up. So when the person hits any key and the screen comes back to life, then the user is required to type the password. I mean, the idea there is the person left the laptop somewhere and forgot about it. So if somebody else finds the laptop and presses the any key and the computer comes back to life, then they still can't use it unless they know the password. Page 466 discusses synchronizing data, and this is also called offline files. In fact, to confuse us more, they also call it file caching, C-A-C-H-E, file caching. Here's the situation. With offline files, it allows us to synchronize the files on the laptop and the user's home directory, which is on the server. Why would you do that? Well, typically if a user is at a workstation and the user saves to the hard disk of his or her workstation, saves a file there, and then the next day goes to another computer and selects File Open and tries to find the file, the user says, hey, where are my files? And you tell the user, well, they're on the hard disk of the computer you were using yesterday. So what we do is we have the users save their files up to their home directory on the server. In fact, the users don't even know it. We just configure it so when the user hits File Save, it goes up to his home directory on the server. So then if a user goes to another computer the next day and clicks on File Open, then the user will have access to his files regardless of where the user is logged onto. Now and this is called the home directory. When the user saves to the server, the user is saving to the user's home directory, which is under the directory called users, which is on the server. In fact, if you remember, under user properties, one thing we did was we configured home folder, and we configured the home folder such that if the user clicks on save, it will save to the Z drive, which is located on server 1 under the users folder. And notice it says %, username, %, and what that means is the file is going to be saved in a folder which corresponds to the user's name. User saves the files to the home folder on the server. Well, here's the problem. Suppose a user has a laptop computer which he brings to work and plugs into the corporate network, plugs into the Ethernet cable. So when the user's at work, he clicks on File, he clicks on Save, and the files get saved up the home directory on the server. So if he goes to another workstation, the files are still available. So here's the problem. The user takes the computer home, and he's not connected to the corporate server, and so now the user is offline. User goes home, and he tries to open the files which were saved on the corporate server, and he says, where are my files? And you tell the user, well, what you should have done is you should have saved the files to your laptop computer, or at least a USB drive, before you left work. Well, users don't remember that. So what we do is we configure offline files. We configure offline files such that when a user saves a file to his home directory on the server, well, the user doesn't know it. It copies the user's home directory back down to his workstation. So when the user goes home, the files are still available to the user. And then when the user goes back to work, they are resynced back up to the corporate server to his home directory. So if the user goes to another workstation, the files are still available. That's called offline files. Home folder on the server syncs with the laptop, and thus the files are available when the laptop is offline. So let's look at configuring that so that automatically happens. So I go to the server, and there's the users folder, and there's the users home folder for Bob. So I want to make it so when Bob saves a file to the home directory on the server, it's going to be copied to his laptop. So I go to Bob's folder and I right click and I select Properties. Now you already know what sharing is. So I go to Sharing and I click Advanced Settings and I click on the checkbox that says Sharing. And we've already discussed that before. But if you look at the checkbox on the bottom of the screen, it says Caching. Sometimes they call it caching, sometimes they call it offline files, but this is what we got to click on. So we click on caching, and now you can see under offline settings, I select the third radio button down that says all files and programs that users open from the shared folder are automatically offline. And what that means is it copies it to the user's workstation. Copies it from the user's home folder on the server to the user's workstation. They also call that caching. So when the user goes home, the files are still available. Now let's turn our attention to the Synch Center, page 470. We synchronize the home directory with a laptop. When does it synchronize? Well, it can be synchronized when the user logs on, when the user logs off, at a particular time of day, every 5 minutes if you want, or when the computer goes into sleep mode. So let's look at that. We go into Hardware and Sound under the Control panel, and under the Windows Mobility Center, we see the Windows Synch Center. And I select the Windows Synch Center, and we can see offline files. Network files are available offline. So if I configure that, it says, when do you want this sync to begin? So I can have it sync at a scheduled time, for example, Monday at 11 a.m. or every day at 2 a.m. or 2 a.m. and 2 p.m. or whatever you want, or when an event occurs, such as log in or log off. So let's start with at a scheduled time. So I can configure that every 1 hour, the files from the user's home directory on the server will be cached down to the workstation. I can do it every hour. I can do it every minute. I mean, the more frequently you do it, the more updated the files will be, but the more network bandwidth it's going to consume. That's one way to go. But the other way to go is when an event occurs. So what you can do there is you can configure synchronization, for example, when I log on to my computer, or when the computer is idle, or when I lock the computer, or when I unlock the computer. Offline files is where the user's home directory is synced with the laptop, so the files are available when the user is offline. And you can cause synchronization to occur when the user logs on or logs off, or when a particular time of day. Here is the argument against offline files. If you have a cable modem or a DSL connection that gives you connectivity to the server at work, well then by that argument, you're never offline. So if you have connectivity to the server at work through cable or DSL, then you don't need offline files. And this concludes part 1 of chapter